Do you remember the African-American Thanksgiving dishes no one makes anymore? They once filled homes with the smell of slow-cooked love and the sound of family gathered close. When did we stop making the meals that carried our stories to the table? Smothered turkey necks were a dish born out of thrift, but remembered for flavor. When whole birds were too expensive, families turned to the necks, rich with bone, sinew, and taste that only slow cooking could release. They were browned first, then smothered in onions and gravy until tender enough to fall apart at the touch of a fork. The gravy thickened slowly, turning glossy and brown, soaking up every drop of history from the pot. It was food meant to stretch and satisfy, each bite filled with patience and care. In kitchens where every scrap counted, this dish was proof that love did not come from abundance, but from what one could do with less. Served over rice or mashed potatoes, it filled the plate with warmth and pride. It was the kind of food that made people hum softly while they ate, grounded by the smell of onions and meat that had been cooking all day. Smothered turkey necks were not just sustenance. They were a quiet declaration of dignity, the ability to make something beautiful from what the world overlooked. Cornbread dressing with gizzards was not a dish made by recipe. It was made by instinct, memory, and the rhythm of a cook's hand. The cornbread came first, baked golden and crumbled fine. The gizzards were boiled until tender, chopped small, and stirred in with onions, celery, broth, and sage. It was not delicate food. It was hearty, deeply seasoned, and made for feeding a crowd. Every aunt, mother, and grandmother had her own version, yet they all tasted like home. This was the soul of Thanksgiving in Black kitchens, where the dressing was often the main event, not the bird beside it. It was cooked in iron pans until the edges crisped and the center stayed moist. The aroma of sage and stock filled the house long before dinner was ready. Even today, when boxed mixes have replaced the slow labor of handmade dressing, memories of this dish linger. Because it was never just food, it was an act of care. Collard greens with salt pork were the sound of the season, the slow simmer of leaves in a pot of smoky broth, the hiss of the lid lifting as steam rolled through the kitchen. These greens were not side dishes, they were symbols. They spoke of survival, of making plenty from what little grew, of gathering around a table that always found a way. The salt pork gave them depth, the kind of flavor that could only come from time. Every leaf softened into silk, absorbing the history of the pot it was cooked in. For many, collard greens were sacred, always washed, trimmed, and prayed over before cooking. The broth at the bottom, known as Potlikker, was so rich it was saved and sopped up with cornbread. On Thanksgiving, the pot stayed on the back burner all day, refilled and shared, a quiet reminder that strength and generosity could grow from even the hardest soil. Ham hocks and butter beans were the meal that made the whole house smell like home. The hocks were smoked and simmered until their marrow melted into the broth, giving it body and heart. Butter beans soaked up all that smoky richness, turning tender and creamy as they cooked. This dish was not made in a rush. It was made with patience, hours on the stove, and the kind of steady attention that once marked good cooking. Families gathered around that pot, dipping in with spoons to taste before dinner was even served. It was humble food, yes, but it tasted like comfort, thick, salty, and deep. For families who could not afford lavish spreads, this was abundance in a pot. It told the story of endurance, of using what you had and still making it sing. Ham hocks and butter beans were a reminder that the measure of a meal was not in its cost, but in its care. Sweet potato souffle with marshmallow topping was the shining centerpiece of mid-century holiday tables, where Southern comfort met post-war aspiration. The base was creamy and spiced, whipped until smooth with sugar, milk, and eggs. Then came the marshmallows, soft, white, and toasted golden under the oven's heat. It was a dish that belonged to celebration, a sign that sweetness could still survive hardship. Every forkful was warmth and nostalgia, a blend of the old and the new. Black families embraced it as a statement of joy, a dessert disguised as a side, rich enough to feel luxurious even in modest homes. The sweet potatoes brought earthiness, the marshmallows added playfulness, and together they made something that looked like light itself. The first bite was always followed by a pause, that silent recognition of memory on the tongue. In homes where food carried meaning beyond taste, this souffle was proof that comfort could be beautiful. Molasses glazed ham steak was the kind of dish that filled the house with perfume, sweet, smoky, and dark with caramel. Before full hams became common, families made do with thick slices cooked in a skillet, basting them in brown sugar and molasses until they shone. The glaze clung like velvet, the edges crisping just enough to give each bite a hint of crunch. Served alongside greens or yams, it was a holiday meal that looked like indulgence, but came from thrift. The molasses brought a depth no sugar could match, rich with the echo of the cane fields and the resilience of those who worked them. The ham steak symbolized progress, a small taste of prosperity earned through labor. When it hit the table, it gleamed like something far grander, its sweetness melting into the gravy and the memory of the meal. It was humble, yet it felt like victory. Stewed cabbage with bacon fat was the scent of southern kitchens in every era. The cabbage simmered down slowly until soft and sweet, the drippings turning it glossy and golden. Bacon fat wasn't waste, it was wisdom. A spoonful of it could transform a pot of vegetables into something rich and soulful. Families who had little learned how to turn nothing into everything, and this dish was their quiet triumph. At Thanksgiving, stewed cabbage was a grounding note among the heavier foods, a reminder of simpler meals and humbler times. The taste was both smoky and tender, with a whisper of vinegar to brighten the bite. It was food that spoke softly, of thrift, gratitude, and the joy of making do. Each serving was a small, sustaining comfort, carrying the memory of generations who refused to waste what could still bring flavor and life. Oyster dressing with cornbread base was where the ocean met the South. It was born along the coasts, where oysters were plentiful and cooks knew how to stretch the sea into something hearty. The oysters were chopped and folded into crumbled cornbread, seasoned with celery, onions, butter, and broth. The smell was rich, a blend of salt, smoke, and sage that filled the house with warmth. For families who had migrated north, this dish carried the taste of home across miles and memories. It was luxurious but humble, decadent but familiar. The cornbread gave it soul, the oysters gave it elegance, and together they created something rare, a dish that tasted like both past and progress. On Thanksgiving tables, oyster dressing was more than a side. It was a story of travel, adaptation, and pride. Candied yams with orange peel brought sunlight to the Thanksgiving table. The sweet potatoes were sliced thick and bathed in syrup made from sugar, butter, and the zest of fresh oranges. The scent filled the room, citrus and caramel, warmth and brightness. This dish turned simple roots into something luxurious, something worth celebrating. Each bite melted like butter, with a hint of tang that lifted its sweetness. For many families, candied yams were the crown jewel of the holiday meal. Sweet enough to count as dessert, soulful enough to sit proudly beside the savory dishes. The orange peel was more than garnish. It was a symbol of creativity, of the instinct to add life and sparkle even in hard times. The glaze shimmered under the light, a promise that every year could still hold joy. Hoppin John was the quiet hope at the heart of the holiday. Long before it became a New Year's tradition, it graced Thanksgiving tables in southern Black homes, carrying its promise of luck and prosperity. Rice and black-eyed peas cooked together, seasoned with onions, herbs, and bits of smoked meat. Simple ingredients turned into poetry. The aroma was deep and comforting, a slow-cooked song of endurance. Each bowl told the story of people who transformed survival into celebration. It was eaten with reverence, each bite a small wish for the future. At Thanksgiving, it reminded families that gratitude and hope were kin, one looking back, the other forward. No dish captured that better than Hoppin John, humble and proud, filling every plate with purpose. Fried corn with bacon drippings was one of those dishes that could make a kitchen smell like heaven itself. The corn was cut straight from the cob, each kernel scraped clean so none of the sweetness was lost. In a cast-iron skillet, bacon drippings sizzled, filling the air with a smoky perfume that could pull anyone toward the stove. The corn hit the pan and began to crackle, softening slowly as the fat coated each piece with flavor. A pinch of sugar, a touch of salt, maybe even a dash of black pepper. That was all it needed. The mixture thickened, becoming creamy without cream, a perfect blend of sweet and savory that belonged beside every roast or ham. For generations of Black families, this dish was a taste of summer brought into winter, a reminder that simple things, corn, fat, thyme, could become something extraordinary. The skillet was passed around the table until it was scraped clean, proof that love did not have to be fancy to be unforgettable. Turkey wing gravy over rice was the kind of meal that reminded people what resourcefulness really meant. When the whole bird was too costly, cooks turned to the wings, meaty, flavorful, and perfect for long, slow braising. They were browned in a pan until golden, then covered in onions, broth, and spices to create a thick, peppery gravy that clung to every grain of rice. The aroma filled the house with comfort long before dinner was ready. This dish was more than a substitute. It was a celebration of ingenuity, a way to make something small feel like a feast. When poured over rice, the gravy turned every plate into a memory, rich, steaming, and filled with care. It was the kind of food that told the truth about the holiday, that abundance was not measured in cost but in the love that went into every bite. Okra and tomato stew was a dish with roots deeper than the soil itself. It came from the coastal South where African techniques met American ingredients and created something timeless. Okra, with its earthy flavor and thickening power, was the heart of the stew, while tomatoes brought color and brightness. Onions and peppers simmered alongside, adding layers of warmth that filled the kitchen with the scent of home. The stew was often served with rice or cornbread, each bite blending spice, sweetness, and history. Families knew that this dish was more than sustenance. It was a bridge between worlds, a connection to ancestors who made the most of what the land provided. On Thanksgiving, it reminded everyone that survival and creativity had always been part of the same recipe. Each spoonful told a story of endurance, resilience, and pride passed from hand to hand. Sweet potato biscuits were soft as memory and golden as morning light. They began with mashed sweet potatoes folded into flour, butter, and a touch of sugar, the kind of recipe measured more by feel than by rule. As they baked, the kitchen filled with a smell so comforting it made conversation pause. The biscuits rose gently, tender and flaky, their sweetness subtle but sure. They were served warm, often split open with butter melting into their orange-hued crumb. For families who could not afford expensive ingredients, these biscuits stretched what little wheat flour they had while adding heart and warmth to the meal. They were a symbol of creativity, of making something special out of the everyday. Passed around the table, they were always gone before the second plate was served, leaving only crumbs and smiles behind. Chitterling pie was a dish that carried history in every bite. It took hours to make, cleaning, boiling, seasoning, all before it ever reached the crust. For the generations who made it, chitterlings were not just food, but a reminder of what it meant to survive. The pie was savory, rich, and deeply aromatic, often baked with onions, peppers, and spices that filled the home with warmth. Though it required patience and labor, it was always made with pride, especially for holidays when the table became a reflection of endurance and gratitude. The pie symbolized transformation, the ability to take something humble and turn it into something worthy of celebration. It was love expressed through work, a labor that connected the present to the past. To eat it was to honor the hands that came before and to remember that Thanksgiving was about both survival and triumph. Corn pudding casserole was the quiet heart of the Thanksgiving table, soft, golden, and comforting in its simplicity. Made from fresh corn, milk, eggs, and butter, it baked into a smooth, custard-like dish that shimmered under the light. Its sweetness was gentle, never overpowering, blending perfectly with the richness of the meal. It was one of those sides that seemed to appear every year without fanfare, yet no holiday table felt complete without it. The first spoonful always melted on the tongue, warm and delicate, with the familiar taste of corn reminding everyone of harvest and home. For families who grew up on southern soil, this dish was memory itself. The sound of spoons scraping the bottom of the pan, the laughter between servings, the quiet nods of satisfaction. Corn pudding casserole did not need to impress. It only needed to comfort, and it did so perfectly every time. Mustard greens with smoked turkey brought a sharp, soulful flavor that balanced the holiday table. The leaves were tougher than collards but carried a boldness all their own, one that mellowed only after hours of slow simmering. Smoked turkey added a richness that tied everything together, its flavor seeping deep into the potlikker that everyone sopped up with cornbread. The greens were tangy, slightly bitter, and absolutely alive with spice. Cooking them was an act of faith, starting with a pile that filled the pot and watching it shrink into something tender and strong. This dish was about patience and endurance, a reminder that good things take time. It was as symbolic as it was delicious. The bitter turned beautiful, hardship turned nourishment. At Thanksgiving, mustard greens were both food and testimony, proof that perseverance always finds its reward. Pecan praline cake was the taste of generosity baked into every crumb. Sweet, sticky, and nutty, it filled the air with the aroma of brown sugar and butter melting together. The cake itself was soft and moist, layered with chopped pecans that toasted as it baked. A praline glaze poured over the top sealed everything in sweetness, dripping down the sides like liquid gold. It was a dessert made for sharing, the kind that appeared at church suppers, family reunions, and holiday feasts alike. Each bite felt like warmth and kindness, like the hand of someone who loved you. In African-American homes, where baking was often both art and offering, this cake stood as a symbol of community and care. It was not just dessert, it was gratitude in edible form. Field peas and rice with fatback were the soul of the countryside. The peas simmered low and slow with strips of fatback that released flavor into the pot until every grain of rice soaked it in. It was a dish of balance, hearty but humble, filling but never heavy. For many rural families, it was the taste of the harvest, a meal that connected the land to the table. Fatback, with its smoky saltiness, gave depth to the mild peas, turning something simple into something sacred. This dish carried history, from the fields to the kitchen, from one generation's hands to the next. At Thanksgiving, it spoke of gratitude not for what was bought, but for what was grown. It was nourishment, memory, and faith all served from the same pot. Stuffed bell peppers with rice and ground beef were the perfect example of how love and patience could turn even simple ingredients into celebration. The peppers were hollowed and filled with seasoned rice, bits of meat, and a touch of tomato sauce, then baked until tender. The juices blended together, creating a rich, comforting aroma that made everyone drift toward the kitchen. This dish often appeared when families wanted to stretch what they had. 1 pound of beef could feed many when combined with rice and vegetables. Yet, despite its frugality, it tasted like luxury, hearty and satisfying in every bite. At Thanksgiving, stuffed bell peppers brought color to the table, red, green, and gold, a little brightness beside the heavier foods. It was a reminder that beauty could be made from resourcefulness, and that the heart of every good meal was the care behind it. Turkey and dumplings were the kind of meal that came after the noise had faded. Once the main feast was over and the table cleared, this dish rose from what was left. Turkey scraps, bones, and all. The broth simmered slow and deep, filling the house with the familiar scent of garlic, onions, and love. The dumplings were rolled by hand, soft pillows of dough that swelled and soaked in the flavor of the stew. Every bite felt like comfort, like warmth finding its way back after a long day. For generations, this was how families honored what they had, turning leftovers into something that felt brand new. The gravy thickened just enough to cling to the spoon, rich but never heavy. It was the kind of dish that silenced everyone at the table except for the sound of spoons scraping bowls clean. Turkey and dumplings were more than thrift. They were gratitude in its purest form, the act of making something beautiful from what remained. Blackberry cobbler with lard crust was the taste of early winter sweetness. Before butter was common, cooks used lard to make crusts so flaky they shattered beneath the fork. Blackberries, often picked wild along fences or creeks, were tossed with sugar and a squeeze of lemon, then poured into a baking dish where the scent of summer met the chill of November. The lard crust puffed and browned, its layers glistening with melted sugar. The filling bubbled through in purple streaks, staining the edges with sweetness. Served warm, it was both tart and soft, a perfect balance of wild fruit and humble ingenuity. In Black communities across the South, this dessert represented care and patience, the time it took to gather berries, render fat, and bake something that would bring everyone to the table. Long before pies came frozen or ready-made, this was the real thing. Handmade, heartfelt, and unforgettable. Fried catfish nuggets were once the pride of riverside kitchens. Before store-bought turkeys became the centerpiece, many families celebrated with what they could catch. The fish was cleaned, cut small, and rolled in seasoned cornmeal before meeting the sizzling oil. It fried up golden and crisp, the sound of crackling carrying through the air like a song of joy. Served with hush puppies and mustard greens, it was both feast and fellowship, the taste of the land and the water together. Catfish was more than a meal. It was an experience, a shared tradition of gathering, cooking, and giving thanks for what the river provided. The texture was everything. Crunchy on the outside, tender and flaky inside, each bite seasoned with the memory of family hands at work. Though you rarely see it now on holiday tables, fried catfish nuggets once meant celebration the same way a roasted bird does today. The meal was as much about the catching as the cooking. Men and boys bringing home their haul, women transforming it into something divine. The scent of fried fish and cornmeal lingered for hours, the laughter of cousins echoing through the evening. This dish carried more than flavor. It carried ritual. It was a bond with place, a way of honoring both nature and effort. To fry catfish for Thanksgiving was to give thanks for the world just outside your door. Macaroni pie was the soulful ancestor of what most people now call baked macaroni and cheese. It was denser, creamier, and made not from shortcuts, but from care. The noodles were boiled, drained, and folded into a mix of eggs, evaporated milk, and sharp cheddar that baked into a custard-like perfection. The top browned into a golden crust that crackled slightly when you cut into it. In Black households, this was the dish that disappeared first, a symbol of prosperity and pride. Every aunt had her secret version, some adding paprika, others a pinch of mustard or nutmeg. The texture was unlike anything boxed or instant, solid, rich, and deeply satisfying. On Thanksgiving Day, macaroni pie sat proudly beside the meats and greens, its aroma reminding everyone that love could be measured in melted cheese and memory. It was a dish of devotion, passed down like a song from one generation to the next. The way it was stirred, the way it was seasoned, all of it mattered. All of it personal. You could taste the patience in each bite, the slow rhythm of hands stirring and tasting until it felt right. This was not food to rush, it was food to remember. The pie held together like family, strong, warm, and whole. Giblet pie was a masterpiece of thrift and flavor. Made from turkey hearts, gizzards, and livers, it turned what others discarded into something special. The giblets were simmered with onions, celery, and sage until tender, then thickened into a rich, peppery gravy. All of it was poured into a pie crust and baked until bubbling, the golden top shimmering in the light. The smell alone could stop conversation, warm, savory, and deep with umami. Families who made this dish knew the meaning of waste nothing, want nothing. Every bite carried history, the quiet satisfaction of making something nourishing out of necessity. Served hot, it felt like home in a crust, humble, generous, and unforgettable. Giblet pie was the heart of old-fashioned cooking, back when every piece of the bird was used and nothing was ever taken for granted. The pie embodied survival. how generations learned to transform scraps into celebrations. The gravy, thick and fragrant, felt like warmth itself, poured straight from the heart of the kitchen. It tasted of time and tradition, of holidays spent laughing over what the world might call leftovers. But in those homes, nothing was just leftovers. It was the foundation of a meal, a story of gratitude written in flour and love. Caramel cake was the jewel of the dessert table, a labor of patience that required both skill and nerve. The cake layers were soft and golden, but the real magic was in the frosting, a caramel poured by hand, made from sugar cooked just to the edge of burning, cooled, and beaten until glossy. It took time, attention, and a steady hand, and one mistake could ruin the batch. Yet when done right, it was a thing of beauty, smooth, sweet, and rich with flavor that lingered long after the last bite. Families gathered around to watch as the frosting was spread, knowing it marked the peak of celebration. It was the dessert reserved for holidays and special Sundays, when love was meant to be shown through effort. The first slice revealed layers of golden promise, and the last crumb always left someone wishing for one more piece. The taste was unlike anything bought from a store, deep, buttery, and with a hint of bitterness that made it unforgettable. It took courage to make caramel cake, the kind of confidence earned from years of standing over stoves. For the women who perfected it, the cake was both pride and offering, a statement that said, "I made this with everything I know." Each bite carried warmth and time, the essence of a kitchen where sweetness was earned, never rushed. Buttermilk pie was the kind of dessert that appeared humble but carried quiet grace. Made from eggs, sugar, butter, and tangy buttermilk, it baked into a custard with a thin caramelized top. The scent was gentle, a whisper of vanilla and cream that filled the kitchen without ever overwhelming it. Its sweetness was modest, balanced by the buttermilk's tart edge, making it perfect after a rich meal. It was a pie that spoke softly of simpler times when dessert came from what was already in the pantry. The first spoonful felt like silk, smooth, cool, and comforting. In Black and Southern homes alike, it represented the shared language of frugality and flavor. Buttermilk pie was proof that a handful of ingredients and a little patience could make something transcendent. The beauty of it was how ordinary it looked, plain and pale, but bursting with richness once tasted. It was the kind of dessert that reminded people that luxury was not about cost, but about comfort. The pie cooled slowly on windowsills, its aroma drifting into porches and prayers. Each slice held a story of hands that measured by instinct, of grandmothers who made do and made magic. Buttermilk pie was tradition disguised as simplicity, a quiet miracle served on a paper plate. Rice dressing with chicken livers carried the taste of the coast and the rhythm of the Creole kitchen. Rice was cooked in rich broth, mixed with minced livers, onions, and herbs until every grain glistened. The scent was deep and earthy, the kind that made you hungry long before it was served. Each family had their own method. Some added sausage, others used bell peppers and celery, but all shared the same intention: to make something abundant from what was available. On Thanksgiving tables, this dish was both comfort and connection, tying the Louisiana Delta to the Carolinas and beyond. The flavor was bold and complex, a blend of the sacred and the everyday. In every bite, there was balance, the simplicity of rice, the richness of liver, and the echo of generations who cooked by instinct, not instruction. The dish spoke to community, to the Creole belief that food was meant to be shared and savored. Each spoonful felt like a gathering of history, of migration, of family. The rice soaked up the soul of the pot, binding the ingredients into one voice. It was food that required care, patience, and presence, just as every good thing does. To make rice dressing was to honor the art of turning labor into flavor, love into nourishment. Sweet potato bread pudding was the dessert of resourcefulness and care. It began as a way to use what was left: stale rolls, extra sweet potatoes, a bit of milk and sugar. The bread soaked up the custard until every crumb became golden and soft, the sweet potato adding color and body. Baked until the edges caramelized, it emerged from the oven fragrant with cinnamon and nutmeg. Served warm, it was silky and rich, topped with a drizzle of cream or a spoonful of syrup. For many families, this dish was a way of showing gratitude through ingenuity, proof that nothing had to go to waste. It was sweet but grounded, soft but full of strength, a dessert that tasted like both humility and joy. In homes where thrift was tradition, this pudding was the sweetest form of wisdom. Every bite carried the memory of hands that refused to throw food away, that saw value in what others overlooked. The pudding was an act of love disguised as dessert, slow, tender, and deliberate. The smell of it baking felt like a promise, a reminder that warmth could come from scarcity. It was comfort in its purest form, soft enough for children, sweet enough for elders, and meaningful for everyone in between. Black-eyed pea salad carried luck into the new year before the clock even struck midnight. Served cold, it was tangy and refreshing, a rare contrast to the heavy holiday spread. The peas were cooked tender, then mixed with diced peppers, onions, and vinegar dressing that danced on the tongue. For many, it was more than a side dish. It was a ritual of hope. In African American homes, black-eyed peas symbolized prosperity and renewal, a tradition passed down from ancestors who made meaning from what they had. Preparing them for Christmas meant faith in what was coming. The salad was easy to make but full of flavor, something that improved with time as it sat in the fridge overnight. The tang of vinegar and sweetness of onion created a perfect harmony of balance and belief. It was light yet powerful, simple yet layered with heritage. At church dinners and family gatherings, you'd always see a bowl of it, glistening, colorful, and made from the heart. It was the quietest dish on the table, but the one with the loudest blessing. Black walnut cake was the definition of patience and persistence, a dessert that came straight from the trees. Families would gather black walnuts after the autumn winds dropped them to the ground, hands stained from cracking the hard shells open. The scent was earthy and bold, filling kitchens with an aroma that could only come from something truly homegrown. This cake wasn't dainty or delicate. It was robust, flavored with spices that clung to the air and reminded everyone of home. Black walnuts were often a gift from the land, not a purchase from a store, and using them was an act of gratitude as much as tradition. When baked into a Christmas cake, their nutty richness turned humble ingredients into something extraordinary. Served after long church services or during crowded family dinners, it stood proudly on every dessert table. Each slice carried the memory of harvests, hands, and hearts that worked hard for every meal. Few desserts today taste this honest, this rooted in the land and the people who nurtured it. Black walnut cake was more than a recipe. It was the flavor of belonging. Record player gift reveals were pure magic, the kind that made Christmas morning unforgettable. The wrapping paper tore slowly at first, then all at once, revealing a shiny new turntable gleaming in the light. For many families, it was the most prized gift beneath the tree. Fathers hooked it up with care, mothers brought out their best vinyl, and soon the house filled with sound. Stevie Wonder, Nat King Cole, and Aretha spun through the room as everyone danced barefoot in their pajamas. Music had a way of uniting generations. Elders swayed, kids twirled, and nobody wanted to turn it off. That first crackle of the needle was the true start of the holiday. Record players weren't just gifts, they were time machines, spinning joy into every corner of the home. Roasted acorns were a last resort food that demanded patience, persistence, and determination. Families gathered acorns from oak trees, leaching them in water to wash away their bitterness. Once roasted or ground into meal, they became a base for porridge, bread, or simple roasted snacks. The work was long, but the result was nourishment when no other options existed. Children often joined in the gathering, their small hands filling baskets that would help carry the family through another lean season. The flavor was earthy and nutty, reminding everyone of the forests that provided when store shelves could not. Housewives baked with acorn meal not out of choice, but out of survival, proving that even the hardest, most overlooked resource could be transformed into food. Roasted acorns are rarely spoken of now, but they represent a reality of the Jim Crow South, that people survived by using everything the land offered. They were sustenance born from endurance, and they kept families alive. Glazed carrots with molasses and brown sugar were once the crown jewel of Christmas sides. Before canned vegetables and store-bought glazes, these carrots gleamed on every holiday plate. The slow simmer of molasses and butter gave them a caramel richness that coated each bite in sweetness and shine. The brown sugar melted into the glaze, creating something that felt both simple and luxurious. It was the kind of dish that reminded families that even humble roots could taste like gold. Kids loved it because it was candy in disguise, while grown folks loved it because it felt like tradition. These carrots weren't about fancy presentation. They were about love cooked into every spoonful. For many Black families, molasses was more than flavor. It was a memory of survival, a sweetener when sugar was scarce. That made these carrots more than decoration. They were gratitude on a plate. The scent of molasses bubbling in the pan filled homes with warmth, a sign that celebration had begun. Today, the dish has faded, but for those who remember, its sweetness still lingers in memory like a song you never forget. Caramel layer cake was the dessert that demanded patience and rewarded devotion. The caramel icing had to be stirred over low heat for what felt like forever, and the smell of sugar turning gold was pure heaven. One careless second, and it would burn. But when it came out right, it gleamed like amber. African American women guarded their caramel recipes like secrets, each one slightly different, perfected over decades of Christmas dinners. The cake itself was tender and buttery, but the icing was the soul of it, sweet, smoky, and just shy of bitter. Served on special occasions, it was a symbol of pride, proof that skill and care could turn a handful of ingredients into art. The first slice cut through the glossy top like glass, revealing soft layers that seemed to melt in the mouth. No factory-made dessert could ever match it. Caramel layer cake was love, labor, and legacy, all baked into one beautiful confection. Community potluck dinners turned church basements into banquets of generosity. Long folding tables overflowed with macaroni, fried chicken, collard greens, and sweet pies carried in from every home. The scent of spice and butter clung to the air, mixing with laughter and gospel tunes from an old speaker in the corner. Elders shared recipes and memories, passing plates as easily as conversation. Children darted between legs, stealing bites before grace was said. No one asked who brought what or how much. It was enough that everyone shared. When the meal was done, leftovers were packed in foil and sent home with whoever needed them most. The food nourished bodies, but the fellowship fed something deeper. It was community made visible. Love served family style, and faith lived out in flavor and care. Pokeberry wine, carefully made from foraged berries, was not just a drink, but a folk remedy tied to survival. The deep purple berries, toxic if mishandled, were boiled and strained, creating a liquid believed to ease pain and treat ailments. In communities with little access to doctors, such home cures became essential. Families passed down recipes through generations, each step carefully guarded to avoid harm while drawing out the plant's healing potential. Housewives prepared it in small batches, knowing it was meant more for medicine than pleasure. Some elders took small sips daily, swearing by its ability to ease arthritis or calm nerves. The drink symbolized ingenuity, proof that even the wild and dangerous could be turned into something useful with knowledge and care. Children were warned never to eat the berries raw, but they grew up knowing the wine's importance to family survival. Though science later questioned its effectiveness, pokeberry wine was once a lifeline born from tradition and necessity. Molasses pound cake was the kind of dessert that lived in memory long after the last crumb was gone. It was heavy in the hand, rich in flavor, and spiced with cinnamon, ginger, and cloves, made for cold evenings when the scent of baking was enough to warm the whole house. Molasses stood in for sugar when sugar was too dear, and it gave the cake its deep brown color and caramel soul. The batter, thick and fragrant, was poured into worn loaf pans that had seen a lifetime of holidays. When it emerged from the oven, the crust glistened, slightly sticky, like honey touched by smoke. African American families passed this recipe through generations, often written in fading ink on the backs of church bulletins or tucked inside cookbooks. It wasn't just dessert, it was preservation. The flavor was bold and comforting, sweet without being showy, a reflection of the people who made it. Served with a glass of milk or a drizzle of cream, it carried history in every bite. Molasses pound cake wasn't about extravagance, it was about memory, about keeping sweetness alive even when times were lean. In that way, it wasn't just cake, it was resilience baked golden. Fried cabbage with bacon fat was never glamorous, but it was always good. It started as a way to stretch meals, turning a simple head of cabbage into something hearty and rich. The sizzling sound of bacon fat hitting the skillet was the beginning of flavor itself. When the cabbage went in, the kitchen filled with a smoky, savory aroma that made mouths water. Seasoned with salt, pepper, and maybe a little onion, it became one of the simplest yet most satisfying sides on the table. For Christmas, it sat alongside the big dishes, greens, dressing, sweet potatoes, holding its own through sheer honesty of taste. Cabbage was cheap and plentiful, but what made it special was the way it was cooked, with care, attention, and a little leftover bacon grease from breakfast. Every bite carried the taste of thrift and wisdom, proof that nothing in a good kitchen goes to waste. It was food that hugged you from the inside, a reminder that love can taste smoky, crispy, and full of soul. Sorrel punch cake was the meeting of islands and America on one holiday table. The red petals of dried sorrel, hibiscus, were steeped into syrup, spiced with ginger and clove, and folded into a rich batter that turned the cake a deep crimson. For many African American families with Caribbean roots, this dessert was more than flavor. It was identity. It carried the tang of hibiscus, the warmth of spice, and the memory of Christmases celebrated across oceans. The aroma was intoxicating, filling kitchens with a scent equal parts floral and fiery. Once baked, it was brushed with more sorrel syrup, glossy and fragrant, a dessert that glowed like ruby glass. Sorrel punch cake connected people to ancestors who had used the same ingredients in a different land for the same reason: to celebrate surviving another year. It was history in sugar and spice, and every bite reminded you that culture can travel far, but it never fades. Christmas morning radio shows were the heartbeat of early celebrations before the world turned digital. DJs with warm voices greeted neighborhoods still half asleep, blending gospel tracks with holiday greetings from local families. Static hummed between songs, and that sound itself felt like home. Mothers cooked breakfast to Mahalia Jackson while fathers tuned the dial, nodding along. Children called in to shout, "Merry Christmas" live on air, their excitement cutting through the noise. It wasn't just music, it was connection, a community linked by airwaves and love. Radios crackled in kitchens and cars alike, carrying the same songs to every listener who needed them. Collard green sandwiches were a resourceful way to fill plates when meat was out of reach. Cooked greens, seasoned with fatback or drippings if available, were pressed between slices of cornbread to make a humble but hearty meal. This simple sandwich was portable, filling, and affordable, making it a dependable choice for families stretched thin by segregation and poverty. Children carried them to school or work in lunch pails, where they stood as proof of both ingenuity and resilience. Housewives leaned on collards because they grew well, even in poor soil, and cornbread was a staple in every kitchen. Together, they created something greater than their parts, nourishing bodies and spirits alike. These sandwiches were not glamorous, but they filled stomachs and carried families through hard days. Though rarely remembered now, collard green sandwiches once reflected a culture of survival, turning two of the humblest foods into a powerful statement of endurance and self-reliance against every hardship imposed. Baked macaroni pie was where comfort met celebration. Unlike its modern boxed cousin, this dish was rich, homemade, and soulful. Layers of tender pasta held together by eggs, milk, and sharp cheddar cheese. African American families treated it as more than a side. It was a centerpiece of holiday tables. The top baked to a perfect crust, golden and bubbling, while the inside stayed creamy and soft. Every bite carried the flavor of home, of effort, and pride. Long before convenience foods arrived, this was what macaroni and cheese meant, a dish born from community cookbooks, perfected in cast-iron pans. Children waited eagerly for the first cut, watching the steam rise as it hit the cool December air. The smell filled the room, mingling with baked ham, greens, and sweet yams, forming the true symphony of Christmas dinner. Baked macaroni pie was more than sustenance. It was identity. It told a story of creativity born from scarcity, of making something extraordinary from what you had. That first creamy, cheesy forkful said everything about love that words couldn't. If these dishes brought back a memory, share it below and don't forget to like, subscribe, and keep their spirit alive.